Good evening. Are we on? We don't have all this technology in our church in Italy. It is for me a joy to be with you this evening. I want to say at the beginning, if I start talking really fast, my wife will go like this, and that means slow it down. So if I keep going really fast, you can all just look over at her. She's right over there. Then she will give me the signal, or you could all just give me the signal. There's a lot of things that I want to say, but the first thing I want to say is thank you. You sent us out 7.5 years ago in a manner worthy of God. And we've been on the field now 7.5 years. And you have prayed for us. You've supported us financially in so many ways. You've been a part of building projects. You've been a part of it all. And so I hope that tonight for you is an encouragement. I hope it's an encouragement because our ministry is your ministry. And I know that sounds cheesy, but I mean it sincerely. I know that you pray for us. I know that you're interested in what's happening. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you because in so many real and tangible ways, we could not be there if you didn't hold the rope here. And so thank you. The other thing I want to say is I hope it's encouraging in that sense because very much so what we're doing there is an extension of what's happening here. But I hope that it's an encouragement to you in another way. Whenever I would hear missionary presentations, wherever it was, if it was Africa or France or wherever, we would get in the car afterwards, and there was this kind of awkward moment where Johanna knew I was going to say, we got to go there. Wherever it was always different. I wanted to go everywhere. That is not the only response. If you want to come to Italy, and there's going to be a portion where I'm going to say, maybe some of you need to consider, should you go to Italy? Should you give your life to the gospel in Italy or somewhere else? And that's what missionaries do. This is kind of part of the job description. We have to call you to that. But at the same time, I hope that you'll see that there is a connection between what we're doing there, that is evangelism and church planting, in church strengthening, body life, and what you're doing here. So I hope that even if you're not the person that's going to go to a foreign land, I hope that the Lord will use this presentation to stir your heart up, as Michael prayed, for what you can do here. There are pictures. Is this me? Do I do this now? They told me, do not touch the remote during the songs. And by the way, Micah, that last song, I was about to cry. So I got the crying out before I started. Okay, so really quick, some super introductory things. This is my email. You can email me right now. This is mjohnston@luxevangelica.com. So if you would like to be a part, we'd like to receive our semi-regular newsletter. We would love to get it to you. Now, some years it comes a lot. Some years it comes slightly less. But it does come. Sometimes we like to build up that anticipation. We don't want to get people too comfortable, so we staggered the letters. But there it is. We would love for you to be a part of that. They do come. Here's my family. I think you know who we are. That's me in the middle. Then there's Johanna, Robbie in the hands, Alice, and Noel. And if you're wondering, is there a prayer card? It's on the way. We took the picture this morning. Mr. Bain, somewhere, I don't see you. There you are, sir. Took a phenomenal picture. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be incredible, right? Missionaries are supposed to be good at things like newsletters and prayer cards. As you can see, that is not our strong point. But if all goes well, at some point before we leave, there will be a prayer card. So if you want us on your fridge, that's going to be a reality. It's also important for you to know that in the Lord's providence, He has us working with another family. So this is Massimo and Susanna, as you can guess here from his name. He looks really Italian. He is Italian. So he grew up in LA, but his family is from Italy. So these are our co-workers, our co-laborers. And so if you hear us talking about Massimo and Susanna, that's them. And they were really pumped about the soccer game, if you're wondering. Okay, so let's start here. So this is a picture of San Lorenzo. It's the main cathedral in our city. And this says, La Superba Bisognosa. So La Superba, it's a word which means either superb, noble, important, or prideful. And Genoa is known as La Superba. Why? It was super important historically. Now, as much as I would love for this to become a historical lecture, it's not going to. But think about things like the Crusades. Where do they send the boats out from? Different places, but places like Genova. So La Superba, that's one of the names for Genova. But that second word, bisognosa, needy. So it's the noble, needy city. Is that a real name for it? Well, that's the name that I give it. I want you to see two things in this first part. First thing, I want to tell you a little bit about the city. You're going to be like, man, why are we praying for you? This is awesome. That looks great. It is great, but it's a needy city. And I want you to see a little bit about where we are, and I want you to get a taste of the need in Italy in general and in Genoa specifically. That's backwards. Where did this name come from? If you're interested, a Petrarca or Petrarch said in 1358, you will see a royal city perched on the back of an alpine hill, proud, there's where the name comes from, because of her men and her walls, whose very appearance suggests it to be the lady of the sea. Genoa is this little city between kind of these hills and these mountains, and it's buttressed right up by the sea. So it's right there. It was super important. But what can we say about Genoa today? Well, here's some pictures. Everybody loves pictures. Here's just kind of an overview of the city. There's the old gate. We know a guy who has a pizza parlor. Does this thing have a little laser? Oh, man. Right there. They usually don't give me the lasers. This is... we know a guy who had a pizza place right there. Oh, man, we're gonna get there. This is a picture that Alice took. Credit to Alice on this picture. So you can go hiking in the hills over Genoa. There it is. There's the soccer stadium. Very important. Okay. What can we say about Genoa? Here's some quick stats. Population, 558,000. It's the capital of Liguria that has about 1.5 million. And I know I'm supposed to read here, but I can't see that. It's the 6th largest city in Italy. It's Italy's largest seaport. And two other quick things you can know. If you're sort of wondering, where is this? I'm about to show you a map. Missionaries love maps. I'm going to show you some maps. But just to kind of orient you, it's 2 hours south, or up the coast, I should say, from Nice, France. It's about 4 hours from Geneva, Switzerland. Right? And if you are a very important guest, I will drive you to Geneva, Switzerland to do the John Calvin tour. Only Kirk gets that treatment. We had a little guys trip up to Geneva. It was incredible. At least I thought it was. Okay, so here it is. There's Liguria, okay, and you can see there's the boot, there's Italy, there is our region, right? It's that little strip right there. And then right in the middle, we have Genoa. So we're going to come back to these maps because there's other things that I want to say, but there you go. That's where we are. And again, you have to begin to understand what the difference is between Parker, Colorado, and Genoa, Italy. And one of the things that might help you sort of begin to grasp this is that when you drive along the streets, you only see one kind of church. Now, there's a few exceptions. Because there are Protestant churches, but by and large, you see Catholic churches. And by and large, people in Italy are nominal Catholics. So we'll talk a little bit about the difference between maybe people who are devout and nominal. But I want you to feel the weight of just the sheer numbers. We're going to talk about some numbers. But just to give you an idea, just in the city center, this is where our church is, like right there, there's 90,000 people. And this is the city, next neighborhood over, right here, 60,000 people. There's no church that we know of there. 70,000 people just over. And again, we could do these numbers about a lot of different places. I'm giving you one example, Italy. We could do this in other countries, but I think it's important that we already have in our mind at this point that numbers are difficult to grasp, right? I mean, we see those numbers and think, man, that's a lot. I think, what's the population of Parker? Like 90,000? More or less, right? And I think maybe it's helpful if you think, okay, if we are the only church in the city center, that there's one other small church where maybe the gospel's preached, it's hard to know. Maybe they have 50 people. And then there's us, and we have about 25 people on Sunday. And there are 90,000 souls just in this dense area of Genoa. Begins to give you an idea about what we're talking about. Here's the port. I said it was Italy's 6th largest port. And just looking at this, you can almost see how dense the city is. Now, I just remembered that there's a video. Do we want to watch the video? It's 2 minutes. My wife said like this. That means yes. We're going to watch. Even if you said no, we're going to watch it. All right. So can we do that? Is that doable? And that's just a little taste. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint here. Thank you so much, sound team. And this is the main road. And just another view of the city. Again, this is where we go to the beach. I know, really tough stuff. So let's talk about the need a little bit. So you can have a little bit of taste of what the city's like. I've shown you some pictures. We saw a video. Let's look at a few numbers. Okay, so
Here's religion in Italy. And this is in Italian, but it's too small to see, so it doesn't totally matter. But we can just look at the graph and kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. So here, 74% Roman Catholic. That's not a surprise, right? I mean, you have to understand that most people will baptize their children even if they have nothing to do with the Catholic Church, because to be Italian is to be Catholic. What's fascinating is that the second largest religious group here, 15-something%, are atheists or agnostics. Think about this. There are Italians with whom I've spoken, and they'll say, well, I decided that I'm an atheist. And you say, okay, tell me about your atheism. I want to understand where you're coming from, because we know there's different types of atheists, right? Some people read a science textbook and they say, I'm an atheist, others for other reasons. In Italy, you'll find people will say something like, well, I'm an atheist because I don't like the Roman Catholic Church. So think about it this way. It's almost as if it was a binary decision, so black and white. There's two options. Either you are a believer, and that means you're Catholic, or you're nothing. And so part of what we want to do is say, well no, there's a whole other reality, biblical Christianity, that doesn't have any of the trappings of the religious formalism of the Catholic Church, right? And so this is sort of what we're praying, this is what we're praying that the Lord would use us to do. Now, from there, you have Islam, right, 3.6, and then it goes up. You have Orthodox Christianity. Here's Protestant Christians, right? 1% of the population. And that number is way too high. I'm going to show you why. So 1%, and we're talking 60 million people, okay? So 1% of 60 million people on some sort of survey associate themselves with a Protestant church. Now, right after that, you have 0.7 Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, before COVID, there was a Jehovah's Witness on almost every corner in Genoa. And for a while, and I think it's probably true, that if we actually do the real calculation, there are more Jehovah's Witnesses than there are born-again believers. So think about that. So not only do you have the darkness of Roman Catholicism, you have added to that false religions like Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, if we go to the next slide, here's why this is interesting. When they talk about Italian Protestants in Italy, and this was a survey only of Italians in Italy, not including foreigners, 65% of that 1% number are Pentecostals. And they don't differentiate between maybe Pentecostals who actually believe in the gospel and in the Bible, and then charismatics who have a different gospel. So here's my point, is that 1% is actually significantly lower. Some people talk about 0.5%. The need is great. That's kind of where we're going with this. So what are we doing? What's our mission? Well, we could explain it this way. So our long-term goal in Genova is to see Christ plant a church that is, and here's what we'd like that church to be. This is what we're praying. Church that's rooted in and nourished by sound Bible teaching, has a vibrant culture of heart-level discipleship, a robust ecclesiology, a distinctive commitment to leadership training, and that labors to see other churches planted in Liguria. This is sort of what we're hoping. We want a church that is mature or maturing and multiplying. That's the great aim. We can say some more about that, though. Here's what we could say. When we're talking about making disciples in Genoa, here's some things that are important to know. As you're praying for us, here's some ways that you can pray for us. Key elements, and you might say, well, are these only in Genoa? This seems like it would be for everywhere. Yes, but I'm going to talk about the specific way in which these are applicable to disciple making in Genoa. Now, we know that the Great Commission is for everybody. It's not just for missionaries. It's not a tack on to the Gospel of Matthew, and we say, okay, here's Matthew 28 missionaries. Well, no, right? I mean, what Matthew does is he says, here's the resurrection. And then there's all these things that happened before the Great Commission, and he doesn't list them. Not because he doesn't think that they happened, but he wants us to see that resurrection and Great Commission go hand in hand. Our Lord is risen. He has all power on heaven and earth has been given to him. And then what does he say with that power? He says, go. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, right? And so that is our mission. And so I hope in some way, as we talk about the way that we do this, it inspires you to be faithful here in Parker. This is in Italian, and it's small, but here's why I put this up. This was one of the last Sunday schools that I did before I left, and we're talking about, and I know that you guys talk about this here as well, the Ordo Salutis, the order of salvation, right? And you might say, well, man, that seems like really heady stuff, right? And you use the Latin phrase, and it sounds cool. right? But what are we talking about? We're talking about that when God saves, things happen in a certain order. We know that we were in Adam, and we know that all of salvation happens in Christ. We actually were talking about that today in Mr. Morris's Sunday school class. It was excellent. But we have to answer an important question. What's the difference between justification and sanctification, right? How do I enter into a relationship with God, and what do works have to do with that? Think about it this way, and start to imagine why this is so important for a Roman Catholic context. Are works important? And as Protestants, we want to say, no. Well, they are, right? But the question is, where are they important? Do we put them in this first category, justification, or do they come later in sanctification? I mean, think about Ephesians 2. So Ephesians 2, we find out, so we're dead, then we're made alive in Christ, verse 4. And Paul is insistent, it's a gift. We've been saved by grace through faith. It's a gift of God. It's not of works so that we can't boast. We get to verse 9 and then verse 10, what does he say? Well, we're God's workmanship. God's created us anew, and there's good works that he's prepared beforehand so that we can walk in them. So there are works in verse 10, but there's no works in verse 9. What are we talking about? Ordo salutis. We have to have the order right. What we're talking about with a lot of people is where do we put works? How does someone find themselves acceptable in God's sight? And we talk a lot about the foreign righteousness of Christ. Luther said that we are simul justus et peccator. So we're simultaneously just and sinners. How does that work? Well, God has to give us a righteousness that is not our own. And again, this is not trying to become a theology lesson, but you get the idea. In our context, that's so important. So theological precision, this is big for us. After that, we talked about having a robustness to our ecclesiology. Now, some Protestants have said, okay, Roman Catholicism, that's high church, right? There's rituals and sacraments and all these things. We don't want that. We're going to sort of abandon all ecclesiology and basically just have the Bible and kind of get together and talk about it. Well, the Bible gives us an ecclesiology. When the Reformers had to talk about, well, what is a true church? We can sort of summarize, they talked about three things. They talked about, one, the preached word. You have to have the preached word. They also talked about the ordinances. There's 2, not 7. You gotta have 2, right? Baptism, Lord's Supper. And then they talked about church discipline. Why? Well, a real church has to be able to say, these people are in. There's a family this morning that became a part of this church, right? They're a part of this church now. And it also has to be able to say, these people are not a part. And so from the beginning, even though we're a small group, we said we have to have a biblical ecclesiology. If that sounds boring, it's not boring. We have to have a group that we can say, I'm a part of that group. And then when there's someone who is not living in light of their confession of Christ, they have to be put out of that group. Our church started as a Bible study in our apartment. At the beginning, there was 2 people, if you don't count my children, Johanna and I. And the very first guy that came, he was such an encouragement. He was a part of our church. He was the first guy there at my dinner table. And he seemed to be walking with the Lord for several years. But sadly, the very first guy that came had to be disciplined out of the church. And you might say, well, that's tragic. It is tragic. And I want you to get a taste of the fact that for every person that stays, it seems like there's 10 that go. And just to give you, again, just a taste of what we're talking about, we are a megachurch in Italy. We have 11 members, right? 11 members, 4 of which are Johanna and myself, and Maswa and Susanna. So when one person is put out of the church, that's radical. But we're convinced that the Lord will bless our commitment to a biblical ecclesiology. And so we're not just saying, well, we don't like Roman Catholic ecclesiology. We're saying, no, the Bible gives us an ecclesiology, right? Membership. In that same day, or in the midst of working on that whole process where this young man tragically was put out of the church, and our hope is that the Lord will use this discipline to bring him back, right? That's the goal of discipline. It's restorative. That would be our desire. We welcomed in 2 new members. This is Gabriele and Priscilla. They are massively encouraging. They moved from Rome. And so the Lord just had in his plan to add these 2 dear believers to our number. And so they were already committed believers. And so here's a picture of the day they were added. If you're wondering what's up with the masks, long story, COVID stuff. We opened back up as soon as we could. We do have regulations in place. If you're wondering what's going on with that, that's what's going on with that. Here they are, though, without masks. That's Gabriele and Priscilla. This is us having some lunch. There's me. What am I doing? I don't know. Okay. John Calvin is not Italian, but he made it into the presentation. Here's why. We said we're talking about biblical clarity, a robust ecclesiology, and we also want to talk about historical mindedness. This is important. I had a friend that said to me over coffee, he says, well, here's what I think about Luther. Luther's arrogant, right? Who's Luther? The whole church says, hey, we believe this, and Luther says, I don't believe that. That's arrogance. There's this amazing story that happens in the 15th century, 1530s, I want to say 39. Yeah, 1539. You guys know John Calvin's in Geneva. He gets put out of Geneva at a certain point, and there's this guy, actually an Italian cardinal, Sadaletto, and he writes a letter to Geneva, and he says, hey, you should not be reformed anymore. You should leave the Reformation, and you should become Catholic again. And he writes this long letter. It's like really kind of fluffy. Hey, you're so great. I love you. I love you. And Calvin writes back. And so here's what Calvin says. I'm just going to summarize this for the sake of time. No, I'm not. I'm going to read it. This is what Calvin says. So here's the charge. Here's the first thing I have to say. This is what he says. He says, these people are innovators. So Calvin, the reformers, what's the deal? They're innovating. They're making new stuff. You don't want the new stuff. You want the old church. And listen to the way that Calvin responds. I think this is really interesting for a Roman Catholic context. He says, as to the charge of forsaking the church, which they were wont to bring against me, there is nothing of which my conscience accuses me, unless indeed he is to be considered a deserter who, seeing the soldiers routed and scattered and abandoning the ranks, raises the leader's standard and recalls them to their posts. For thus, O Lord, were all thy servants dispersed, so that they could not by any possibility hear the command, but had almost forgotten their leader and their service and their military oath. In order to bring them together when thus scattered, I raised not a foreign standard, but that noble banner of thine whom we must follow, if we would be classed among thy people. What's he saying? Here's what he's saying. He's saying, I didn't bring new truth, a new standard, a new banner. I didn't raise a new banner. I noticed that banner that the church has always raised, the true gospel in Christ alone, by grace alone, through faith alone, to the glory of God alone, that had fallen to the wayside. And so it's not that we're saying, hey, here's a new option. We're going back to the old truth. And as you can imagine, this becomes really important when you're speaking with Catholics. It's not hey, this is kind of a new idea. It was born in the 16th century. No, this is the old truth that the church has always believed. And somewhere in the late Middle Ages, it got confused in most places. So that's some key things about what we're doing discipleship-wise. And if you're wondering, are there other John Calvin quotes? There are not. Yet. We'll try to work them in. Okay, a che punto siamo? Where are we, right? Where are we in this whole church planting deal? We've shown you some of that. Here's our church name, Lux Evangelica. It's a cool name. What does it mean? It means gospel light. So we picked this name because it recalls something about the Reformation, right? Maybe you've heard that in Geneva they had printed on the coins. It's a common Reformation slogan, post tenebras lux, after darkness, light. And if you read your New Testament, you find all over the place that Jesus is light. We are to be the light of the world. Just like in creation, God says, let there be light, and there's light. In 2 Corinthians 4, God does it in our hearts. There's recreation. He says, let there be light, and there's light in our hearts. So we picked this name for that reason. Now, here's where our church is located. We saw this in the video. This is Piazza della Vittoria. And the church is like over there. Let's zoom in a little bit. This is the one day that it snowed. We were actually flying in this day, and we did not land in Genoa, just to let you know. But there it is, and here's another picture. This is one of the first Sundays that we came back post-COVID. That's the deal with the whole masks. Everyone was excited to be together. And just to let you know, it's interesting because there's some churches that are still not reopened post-COVID. So there's even an opportunity there. Okay, what has the Lord been doing? Well, we can talk about body life. I'm going to show you some pictures. Little by little, he's knitting our hearts together, and we're starting to share life. And that's been complicated with COVID, but the Lord has been pleased to answer our prayers, to give us sweet opportunities to be together. We've been doing a series on the 10 Commandments. When we start to talk about, well, what does it look like to follow God? Well, we don't submit to the 10 Commandments to earn our salvation. We've already said as much. But the 10 Commandments do, in a great way, show us what does it mean to live or to live in a way that's pleasing to the Lord. So we've been studying the 10 Commandments. I preach most Sundays and have been doing so for maybe about 5 years. If you're wondering what's it like to preach in your second language, it is a brutally humbling experience that is getting a little bit better after 5 years. English Bible study. We started an English Bible study. There is a whole group of Nigerians that come to our church. We've been able to reach out to them. There's a big Nigerian population in Genoa. That was on one of the slides. I kind of skipped over it. Over 10,000. And so we've started this English Bible study. We have a sweet gal from South Korea, and she comes as well. And so we've been doing the English Bible study. We've had our first baptism. I'm going to show you some pictures of that. And the Lord has begun to send some men to the church. Now, women are a massive blessing to the church. In fact, one scholar says in the 2nd century that it could be that up to 2/3 of the church was made up of women. Well, why? Because Christianity offers something that other religions don't. They honor women in an appropriate way. And yet, we know that to lead the church, we need men. You have to have strong men. And what you find, and you see it even in this body, is when there are strong men, there's strong women. Women are honored and uplifted and can flourish. So this is exciting because up to this point, there had not been a lot of men. So I'm going to show you some of these guys. There's Elena, and Elena is an absolute joy. She was one of our first members, that guy that got disciplined out. It was her and this other guy. They were our 2 first members. So she has remained faithful. She is an unbelievable evangelist. I'll show you where she lives. She lives an hour away. She comes an hour every day to come to church. She is a massive blessing and constantly trying to introduce us to new people with whom we can share Christ or talk about the gospel. So through Elena, we've had tons of opportunities. This is her at our house. So she is a joy. It's complicated in Italy. Just kind of give you a little bit of the idea of the hoop jumping that takes on or that takes place with COVID. There's like a limited number of people that can eat in a home, but if you go in a restaurant, you can eat as long as there's 4 at a table, but you can have a group in this room. It's really complicated. You got to have your mask when you're walking around outside. When you sit down to eat food, you can have it off. But anyways, what we did is we said, instead of waiting for everything to open, as soon as there's an opportunity, we're going to take advantage of it. And so restaurants opened. A lot of people were still like, no, it's too dangerous. We just started doing our fellowships in this restaurant. It blessed a small local business. And so we started to have, because we used to have a monthly lunch, which we now have in this restaurant. So here's just some of our church. There's my partner Massimo saying some really important stuff. Here's some of the other guys hanging out, eating some pasta. This is the baptism service. Here is, give you an idea, this is the inside of our church. This is a larger than normal group that came for the baptism. I'm assuming you guys do testimonies here for baptism. Yep. So she, Sandra, who I'll show you, gave her testimony. This is Sandra. She's a dear, dear sister in Christ. Crazy story. She was saved in France. She's from Nigeria. She was saved in France listening to John MacArthur or watching John MacArthur videos. Finds our church in this crazy roundabout way, and she is just on fire for the Lord. So you can pray for Sandra. Here's a picture of her. There's her about to get dunked. And there she is. There's Sandra. She's an absolute joy. She speaks like 500 languages, like 4. And she is a massive blessing for our church. She's an example for our children. And so she's an absolute joy. And so she became a member when she was baptized. Then we went out, hung out right by the church. Here's some other folks from the church. And so here's some of the guys. So we moved recently. I'm going to talk to you about that. But these are the guys, and you can kind of see there's Stefano, there's Antonio, and there's Gabriele. That's his head. Now, I want to give you a highlight of these 3 guys so you can kind of know how to pray for them, because if the church is ever to be maturing or mature, we need men who can pour into other men. That's just what happens in this church, right? Number 1, Gabriele. We told you they were the members that joined. They were wearing the mask. We showed you the picture. This is the same picture you've already seen. He's already done some Bible school. And right now we meet on Saturdays. First, we work through diagramming how to diagram a text. I know, really nerdy stuff. It's awesome. And now we're working through systematic theology. He's hungry, he's sharp, he's bright. He's trying to decide, is the Lord calling me to full-time ministry? So you can pray for Gabriele. And whatever the Lord does with him, he's already a massive blessing to the church. This is Stefano, another guy. So Stefano, here's his family. About a year, or 2 years ago, we started homeschooling, more or less. And this is another family. Pretty much in Italy, in Genoa, there are 2 families that homeschool, us and this other family. But it's been amazing. So we spend tons of time with this other Italian family. They were saved through Swiss missionaries. So Swiss, Italian-speaking missionaries come down to Italy, share the gospel with this couple. They were saved about 7 years ago. They're a part of a house church movement and have begun to ask a lot of questions. So in the Lord's providence, a little bit through homeschool and through some other circumstances, we've spent a ton of time together. And he's really just opened up and allowed me to pour into him, talk to him about theology. Lord willing, we'll begin a course of Greek. He's going to let me teach him Greek when we get back. So pray for Stefano. He is immensely gifted. He's a gifted teacher. He's a gifted shepherd. He's insightful. And so we thought, well, probably the Lord will save someone, and then we'll raise that someone up, and they, Lord willing, will become an elder and maybe someday the pastor of the church. But it could be, and obviously we don't know what the Lord's going to do, but it could be that Stefano could be that guy. So instead of raising up a spiritual son, he sends a spiritual brother. And I know that we're all brothers in Christ, but you get the idea. You get where I'm going with this. And it's been such a blessing because Valentina, his wife, is a dear friend of Johanna's. Here's our family hanging out. This is usually what happens. They're kind of doing stuff, and then we kind of get locked into an intense conversation in the background. So far we've talked about Gabriele, and now we're talking about Stefano, and now we want to talk about, here's us again, hanging out. There you go, Massimo, Susanna, Stefano, and Valentina. Antonio, this is me in a truck. He actually let me drive his truck. It went horrible. He goes, you know what? Anyone can go forward. You should go in reverse first. I was like, he's like, is that normal? He's like, no, that is not normal. Never do that again. So Antonio, I think he could be such an encouraging deacon. So 2 seconds about Antonio, and then we gotta go forward. Antonio, his wife's mom, stay with me. His wife's mom is the pastor of a Pentecostal church in Genoa. So they, in an incredible way, started to look at sermons on the internet, found us, and what, especially in his life, Antonio, also in his wife, Deborah, but what they've latched onto has been so encouraging. But there's such a dearth of pastoral ministry, preaching, truth. So he and I also meet on Saturdays, super encouraging guy. And really, the Lord is giving him great discernment as he's unraveling all that he's experienced. Because you can imagine when your mother-in-law is the pastor of the church that you used to attend, there's a lot that you're trying to figure out there. Okay, evangelism. So that first part was sort of like, where are we with the church plant? Okay. Now I want to talk to you a bit about evangelism. We do all sorts of things. Pre-COVID, we did all sorts of conferences, and we would try to find ways to get people into the church. We did a conference once on the Gnostic Gospels, because people ask questions about the Gnostic Gospels. I remember that conference. My wife says to me, what? The Gnostic Gospels, is that a thing? I'm like, it's totally a thing. It's definitely a thing. Some people came, just totally random people. While we were doing that, there was one guy that loved the Gnostic Gospels. So he was there because he thought they were great. The presentation I gave had a sort of different idea, so that was interesting. But we do stuff to reach out to people. We used to do a lot of cold turkey evangelism, just walking up to people. This is going to sound really complicated. Now, you would just say, hey, would you want to talk about religious things? Do you have time for that? And sometimes people would. So we've done all sorts of things, but I would say the core of what we do, and this is also what the core of what the Molokas do, has to do with hospitality and building relationships with people. Now, from that, there are opportunities. Now, Massimo has a Bible study that he does once a week with 2 Roman Catholics. So it began as a friendship with one guy, then a Bible study that he does every week with 2 Roman Catholics. And now we meet once a month to talk about, we've talked about transubstantiation, we've talked about Mary, we've talked about all sorts of stuff with like 8 Catholics. We get together and they just ask us questions, we open up the Word, and they're interested. But again, the core of what we do, sort of the beginning, is evangelism at home. And if you're saying, the gospel comes with a house key. Did you think of that? No, I did not. It's from a book. This is a book by Rosaria Butterfield. The gospel comes with a house key. Very interesting book. Here's what she says. She says, those who live out radically ordinary hospitality see their homes not as theirs at all, but as God's gift to use for the furtherance of his kingdom. It's good, right? And I love that phrase, radically ordinary. What does it look like to have people over? It's a lot of work in some ways, but it's simple. It's normal. There's not a lot of bells and whistles. Having people in our home, trying to feed them, trying to take care of them, and trying to talk to them about Christ. I have to say that one of the driving forces in this is my wife. Johanna is an incredible evangelist. I will never forget when in Rome, when we were in Rome, so we were in Rome for 2 years, we learned the language there. It was rough in a lot of ways. Rough because the Lord was revealing our sin. Rough because it's disarming not to be able to speak the language that you need to be able to take care of your family. And we would go to this church. This is a church that was kind of helping us get ready for the next phase of our ministry. And we would just get dominated. I mean, it was just straight domination. We got done with church and we were like, we need like a 7-hour nap. I mean, that was unbelievable. We basically just kind of like licked our wounds until the next week. It was incredible. I remember we get done, and this was just right at the beginning. We're coming home and I'm thinking, okay, glad that's over. I'm not sure if that's very godly, but I'm very glad that's over. Our neighbor comes up and she's like, we're having a birthday party. You have to come right now. And we were just talking in the car about how dominated we just got in church. I'm thinking, obviously. I'm like, you said no, right? She's like, no, I said we're coming. Our neighbor said to my wife, Johanna, hey, we're having a birthday party. I'm thinking, obviously, you're going to say no. We're not going to she's like, we're totally going to the birthday party. This is the conversation we'll have a lot. Hey, I think our schedule is like pretty full. We should probably scale it back. I'm like, yes, we should probably do that. Next day, hey, tomorrow night, this couple is coming over for dinner. She loves talking to people about Christ, and she's always getting people in our home. So what does this look like? Again, from Rosaria Butterfield, she says that radically ordinary hospitality characterizes those who don't fuss over different worldviews at the dinner table. The truly hospitable aren't embarrassed to keep friendships with people who are different. Jesus dined with sinners, but he didn't sin with sinners. Jesus lived in the world, but he didn't live like the world, right? And so this is sort of what we're aiming at. And one of the ways that the Lord is allowing us to do this is we were able to purchase a home. And so for us, this represented a lot of things. This was an opportunity to put down roots in Italy, be committed to Genoa, show people that we're there for the long haul. And we kind of had this weird thing where before COVID, we looked at 2 places. One was a normal house. The second one was a bed and breakfast. It's like, we should totally just buy a bed and breakfast. Joanna's like, what? Like, why would we do that? Like, we should totally do this. And so after COVID, the price dropped big time. There was this huge opportunity. These people wanted to get out of their bed and breakfast. And so the Lord worked it out and we bought a bed and breakfast. Crazy stuff, I know. So this is the piazza right by our house. And if you walk up this road, you get to our house, and this is what our house looks like. This is not our front door, if you're wondering. It's an apartment, right? It's an apartment, and there's actually several hotels within this apartment. So you walk through this door. It's a really cool building. It was built in 1906. You walk in. Oh, and by the way, so we were down there before looking in. Now we're further away. And our garden, see a little arrow? Our garden's right there. And then in the garden, we have this barbecue area. This is me lighting a fire. I was in Boy Scouts, so just knocking out of the park there. But we've been able to use this house to welcome people in a unique way, even with this garden. And our hope is long-term that some of you will come visit. There's a lot of bedrooms and a lot of bathrooms. And if you're thinking, hey, I don't want to be sleeping anywhere unless I have my own bathroom, you can have your own bathroom. you should totally come. We would love to host you, and our hope is that this is going to be a ministry tool both to house people, maybe some long-term, welcome guests from America. The possibilities are endless. Of course, we'll see what the Lord does with travel, COVID, et cetera. But our desire is that in some way, we can use this house, this bed and breakfast, to that end for the sake of the gospel. We meet people in all different ways. These are some long-term friends. This is us kind of hanging out, eating some food. This is Marino and Sara. We've asked you to pray for them various times. Maybe you've heard of Marino and Sara. We've talked about them a lot. There they are hanging out at our house. Quick story. I hope this is an encouragement to you, because sometimes we think about evangelism. We think, man, evangelism is hard. Totally agree with that. Sometimes I see my neighbors and I think, man, I want to get in the elevator really quick because I don't want to talk to them. But we have to ask ourselves, well, what do we have to do to cultivate a heart for the lost? Here's one thing you could do. You could pray, Lord, give me evangelistic opportunities. And our Lord is so pleased to answer that prayer. I'll give you one example. I ebb and flow, and there's just sometimes when I think, Lord, I have to meet new people. I have to. And that morning I prayed, I said, Lord, give me evangelistic opportunities. If I remember correctly, he worked it out where I met this priest that day. Long story. I'll tell you after if you're interested. But that night, I went to the eye doctor. Now, I had not been to the eye doctor in 5 years. That's another long story. And I get there, and the eye doctor, he's like, what are you doing? Like, you don't want to see? Why don't you want to see? Because my eye's really bad. But anyways, that's not the story. At the eye doctor, who do I see? Our old neighbors. Now, if you're wondering, what is this picture? Well, this is where we used to live. See a little arrow there? Right there. That's where we used to live. And right across the way lived Michele and Francesca. Now, we saw them all the time. It's actually kind of interesting because their window looked into ours, and ours looked into theirs, and so we would just spy on them constantly. No, that's not true. But our lives were just right there, right? And so we saw each other all the time. We were there for 5 years. 5 years. We never hung out. I see Michele at the eye doctor. We had exchanged 4 words at that point. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is a part of the answer to that prayer. And so I said, I'm just gonna invite him over. And I thought, that's kind of weird. We hardly even recognize each other. I didn't even recognize him. He's like, hey, I'm your old neighbor. I'm like, great. Hey, we were gonna have a barbecue. You wanna come? And they came. And they loved it, and their hearts were ready. And so here's the encouragement. Sometimes we are slow to act because we think it has to be this big special thing with this super special presentation. But sometimes all it is I'm gonna muster up the courage to invite that guy over to my house, get to know them, find out what they're all about, and hopefully I can begin to share the gospel with them. And so they came over, we had a barbecue, and the Lord was kind. We talked about the gospel, all sorts of things. We'll see them again. But that's a lot of what happens. I know we got to start wrapping up, and we're going to do that, but I want to encourage you with this. We all have family members, we have friends, we have all sorts of people with whom we've talked often about Christ. And the question is, what do we do if we don't see results? Our job is to faithfully scatter the seed of God's word. And I would also add, we have to take joy in that. As a missionary in a country like Italy, when you have 11 members, and so far through my ministry, as far as I know, there's been no one directly converted through my ministry, except maybe a German guy, another story. What do we tell our hearts? What do we say? How do we go out? What are we waiting for? We don't know all that the Lord's doing. Charles Bridges said this, and it's always encouraging to my heart. This is what he said. He said, ministerial success must be viewed as extending beyond present appearances. The seed may lie under the clods till we lie there and then spring up. Maybe it's the next generation that's going to do the things that we long to do. Maybe the Lord's going to raise up other people to water the seeds that we've planted. This is the end, if you're wondering. Is this the end? This is the end. I want to finish here. Are we good 5-ish more minutes? 2 minutes? 2 minutes? You can't say no. I can't. Okay, I'm going to be super quick. That was unfair. You can't put someone on the spot like that. Okay, La Lanterna. This is another name for the city. La Lanterna. La Lanterna means lantern, but it's this lighthouse here. Genoa has the opportunity to be a lighthouse to the other places in and around it. So super quick, I'm gonna show you this and then we'll be done. But Genoa is here. That arrow is coming from Savona. That's over an hour away. That's where one of our friends come from. So in Savona, that's really hard to read, there are about 58,000 souls, okay? And just to kind of set us up here, so C.S. Lewis has said, there are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. What's he talking about? He's saying that everyone with whom we interact, human beings, people, they will live forever in one place or another, right? So 60,000 souls in Savona, there is no gospel preaching church that we know of in Savona. So they come from an hour away, 60,000 people. Even farther in Finale, where there's 11,000 souls, we have 2 dear ladies that come from Finale. That's like an hour and a half away. But then even further away, in Albenga, there's a family that come. In Albenga, there's 23,000 souls. They don't have a church. But then even more than that, there's a guy named Giuseppe who comes as off the map from Alessandria. It's an hour and 15 minutes away where there's 92,000 souls. There's been people that have come over from La Spezia, 91,000 souls. So all of these people come to our church because there are no churches that they want to attend. And so this is the call. We're praying that the Lord would send other families to Italy, to Genoa, to come and be a part of what we're doing so that they can then plant churches in these places. Pray to that end. Pray that the Lord would send more workers. Pray that he might even raise up men in our midst that can be sent. And then how can you pray? You can pray for revival. There's been revival in Italy before. Pray for men who can teach others also. And then last, we just ask that you pray for our family. We're grateful for you. If you have any questions, if there's things that you want to know, I would love for you to email me. If you have questions about missions, about anything that I said, about Italy, about Roman Catholicism, I would love to have that conversation with you. And again, at the end, thank you for letting me have 5 extra minutes. And thank you for your attention. Thank you for your interest. And I just want to say at the end, there's been so many of you that have come up and just said, hey, I read your newsletters. Hey, we're praying for you. And that means the world for us. For my family, it's always a homecoming coming to Parker Bible. We're grateful for you. Thank you.